But then there's this where they're just absolutely, you know, something's going wrong. So she bursts in the room. She says, "You got to come. Something's happening." And the first thing I thought of, she said, "Something's going wrong with the ventilator." And I ran to his bedside. And as I say, he'd been in a coma, and this was the first time, but his eyes were open. And it became pretty clear to me there wasn't anything wrong with the ventilator. What he was trying to do, although his hands were all bandaged like a mummy, what he was trying to do was to pull the tube that was in his windpipe out, that he was obviously trying to get it out to talk. And I was, again, I remind you, I was an intern. I made the decision that he looked so wide awake that it was safe to pull this tube out. And I want to remind you, this is the first time we've even looked in each other's eyes, let alone talked to each other. And the very first words out of his mouth are, "What's happened to my father?" And I made a terrible mistake. As I said, I was an intern, and I just couldn't bring myself to tell him that the very first words out of my mouth was going to be that your father's dead. So I lied, and I said, "Your father's fine." And he looked at me and he said, "Are you sure?" And I became a little bit less certain, and I said, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Well, how come my father's standing at the end of my bed not doing anything but smiling?" And I turned around. I didn't see anything at the foot of the bed, but I sort of felt the enormity of what was happening. And I said, "You know, I have something terrible to tell you, and that's that your father passed away." And he said, "Well, that must be his spirit. That must be his ghost at the end of the bed that's watching over me." And he went on to make a miraculous recovery. And as happens in a long surgical residency, my neurosurgical residency was 10 years long, I lost track of him. And another 9 years went by, and it was literally the last day of my residency at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and I was finally getting to give my beeper away. It was the communications floor was on the 12th floor, so I pushed the button on and got on the elevator, and on the elevator there's this woman whom I recognize, and next to her is a tall teenager who obviously once upon a time had been a burn victim. And all of a sudden I realized the reason I recognize the woman is that's the mother who gave us permission in Philadelphia, and this has got to be Thomas who's standing next to her. And it occurred to me that this couldn't just be coincidence, that on the very last day of my residency, after nearly a decade of not thinking about this kid, that the universe had sort of brought him around as if to say, "Don't you try and sweep this under the rug. Don't you forget what you've been a witness to." And Henry David Thoreau said, "It's never too late to give up your prejudices." And I think, you know, mine were just starting to erode slowly. The way I think about this is now is that the universe is constantly trying to speak to us. You know, what I liken it to is I can go for a hike in the mountains, and I'm bopping along the trail, and I'm looking at the trees, and I'm looking at the mountains, and I see everything. But behind me comes Ansel Adams with his camera, and suddenly he's seeing exactly the same things that I saw, but now he sees the power and the majesty and the beauty that was there that I just walked past. And I think that when we open up our eyes and ears, the universe is there constantly trying to talk to us.